Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For whatever time you're watching this, welcome to Nation Watch. My name is Eden Corbin, and this show is powered by the People's National Congress Reform. The day is October 26, 2025, and we have a very special guest with us today. I was informed a few moments ago that he will be celebrating a birthday shortly, and the guest we have is no other than Mr. Hamilton Green. Now, most of you, like myself, would know this young man, and I say young man, and I see he's blushing there. And we're happy to have him today to be able to discuss. For those of you who do not know or are not familiar with Mr. Green, he has served in all of the highest positions within the government and within the People's National Congress Reform, not limited to, but included the Prime Minister, the Mayor of Georgetown. He was the General Secretary of the party, and he has been a student of life and a very great politician, if I do say so myself. So good day, Mr. Green, and welcome. I'm glad that we're finally able to sit down and have this conversation. How are you doing today, sir?
My pleasure, and always good to share experiences with this young generation who need to know our history so that they can have the bunks
Correct.
to make Guyana a better place.
And I like how you spoke about the history, and that carries us into the first point. You noted, and you would have directed me to a piece that you've written recently in the news, and I would just want to ask you if you could just briefly reflect on the most transformative infrastructural project during your tenure within the government.
But first, to answer the question, we need to put the 70s and the post-independence period, post-Republicans' position in the context of the world as it was. This is important for our people, young and old, to appreciate the magnificence, the courage, and the visionary competence of Corbin Burnham. When we got independence, and decades after that, we were in the midst of the Cold War. I don't think many of us recognize the intensity of the Cold War and what it meant to small countries all over the world. It is a struggle ideological, as well as dealing with territorial snatching that existed. The West and the so called colonist world. That condition consumed many countries. It led to the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and conflicts all over the world, where the two titans were fighting each other for territory, resources, and influence. When we got independence under Forbes Burnham, that was the situation in our world. But as he sought to put in place measures to make independence more than just a flag and an anthem and the trappings of a new nation, he sought to ensure that we moved out of the colonial environment, beliefs. And the first thing he did was establish what we call an institute of decolonization, where we put in place measures to go throughout this country and beyond to tell people the significance of independence and what we need to do to make our independence a reality and to make optimal use of our God-given resources. And so he did one. To ensure there is equity, he articulated a position of free education from nursery to university. That was intended to ensure that all of our people, from the hinterland to the coast, from the west to the east, got an opportunity to make full use of their potential. At the same time, we put in place a massive program to retain and retrain our teachers so that our teachers will not be mere teachers, but be educators in the new environment we found ourselves in. That effort, that journey was not easy because you had around us those with a slave mentality, the house slave mentality, and those who saw independence as no more than an anthem. To compound our difficulty, there was, as the symptoms loomed, when Burnham articulated to feed, clothe, and house the nation, there was the oil crisis, triggered by a conflict between the West and the oil-producing nations. OPEC, which meant oil-producing export countries. The price of oil went up dramatically. And so, by the 70s, if we sold, say, 20 tons of sugar and our rice to gain foreign exchange, to say buy a gallon of fuel, when the oil crisis hit us, we had to sell 2-3 times the amount of local produce to buy that oil. And so that put tremendous hardships on every citizen in this country. Because Burnham was determined to make our independence a reality. The rest, of course, is documented, and I don't need to regurgitate what you may already know. But those two factors made life in this country difficult. In addition, we had to deal with an opposition, the PPP, who set out to sabotage the programs. For example, the feeding program. They persuaded some of their supporters who produced vegetables, ground provision, etc., not to bring their produce into Georgetown. It was not particularly successful because the farmers wanted to make money. To deal with that evil situation, Burnham on horseback rode throughout the urban centers, distributing seedlings, materials, and encouraging people to plant on their parapets, and Sophia in particular. What we see now as a massive housing project was intended to be an agricultural adventure. But because of the pressure of housing, you have the condition which exists today. I can pause and allow you to ask questions based on what I've said and what you may want to learn about that difficult period in our history.
No, you would have mentioned the history of where we came from. And we're living in a different society now, rightfully so. Now, the question I would have for you is that do you think that the politics of your time in the 1970s, 1980s, and the politics of today, do you think that there has been a major shift? Or was there a major shift in politics from then to now?
Well, the answer is yes. Because today you have a group of politicians, because you said politics, who either don't understand or appreciate the meaning of independence in a very complex world. A world where you have a superpower, a world where we are blessed with natural resources. And instead of harmonizing those resources and speaking not tough, but as proud, independent people, we have and continue to surrender our vast resources. To answer your question, therefore, the politics have changed because you have a cadre of political leaders today who have taken the easy route, which is surrender. Look, the resources we have today, oil, gas, diamond, timber, gold, is more than enough to make every Guyanese and every family happy, prosperous, and to have no need for any tincture of poverty. In fact, with some friends, we did an analysis a few weeks ago. And if we harmonize the resources we can get from oil and gas, every day we're hearing of new oil finds, that there's no need to harvest our gold. And we took a position that what we ought to do, instead of giving out all these gold resources to outsiders, keep it, because gold don't rust until young Guyanese get the technique and acquire the machinery and the skills to harvest that gold. Because It is fair to assume, based on the world over the past few centuries, that gold will always be a precious metal for whatever reason. And we should take account of that fact and don't give out thousands of acres of rich gold lands. It is bringing some amount of prosperity. But I think as political leaders, we need to make optimal use of our vast natural resources. And what we have today, to repeat myself, should make Guyana the greatest country in the world. We're less than 1 million people, and the resources we have can feed, clothe, house, and make jolly a population 10, 20 times ours, and bring home all those Guyanese who fled the country for one reason or not, to enjoy the bounty, the grace that the Creator gave this country. If you look at the figures, there's no other country in the world with the massive resources we have per capita. None. The oil-rich countries still have to buy food. We can produce our own food, clothing, we can house ourselves with the less than 1 million souls that inhabit our 83,000 square miles.
Now, if I may, referencing the first things that you mentioned in relation to a more hands-on approach to development and leadership that we saw by Comrade Leader Forbes Burnham. And in today's society, we see a transactional type of politics where everything is quid pro quo. You understand? You do something, you're connected to the right people, or you're aligned with the right individuals, and you can see a growth or almost instantaneous development, which then seeks to, which I think fits squarely within the instant type of gratification or the culture of that we see within Guyana. Would you say that the politics have shifted from the ideology, which is the belief in a system, or the belief in values and ideas that can now grow and develop Guyana, to a transactional politics whereby you have to be getting something? There's no longer, as you mentioned, we have all of these resources available to us. We are the only country that could be able to take care of itself. When you look at the economic statistics, we have all that we need to be able to survive. Yet we see the government continuing to borrow money from the IMF and all of these foreign entities, increasing our interest rates and these things within the financial sector for short-term gain, while in the long term, we still have things like poverty that is still very much a prevalent issue in Guyana. So my question is, would you agree that there has been a shift from an ideological politics in Guyana to a transactional politics? And could you comment on that briefly?
There has been a shift. I believe an unfortunate one. When we began our journey after independence, after slavery, which we can talk about a little later, because that has been a serious issue in this country where people don't understand the enormity of damage done as a result of centuries of slavery, where the slaves were not allowed to understand who they were. And among the 6 people, the slaves were the worst treated and did not have an opportunity to grow. In other words, our roots were completely severed. When our ancestors were captured in West Africa, put on the boats heading for America and the Caribbean. They were not even allowed to bring with them their cultural symbols. The drums were thrown overboard. So we came here disconnected from our past. And unless you know where you came from, you really have difficulty striding ahead to the future. But to deal with the question you posed, the answer is yes. When we began our journey after independence, we adopted the philosophy of what I call deferred gratification. That is, not to try to, as we say, fill the belly one time. That meant sacrifices. And I can give you some examples which may seem difficult to this generation. When we embarked on the feeding program, a critical factor was to wean our people away from the things we had imported and which we didn't import during the Second World War. And that's the irony. During the Second World War, the ships didn't have a chance to bring in all this flour and apples and things that we see flood the market. And we survived. In fact, I suspect that those of us who grew up during the heyday of the Second World War and ate local stuff may be a little stronger than those who came after. When the war broke, I was 5 years old. And I knew nothing of wheat and flour, knew nothing about what we call ice apples. So what Burnham sought to do is to bring to the consciousness of our people that we can produce all of the fruits, vegetables, ground provisions we need to feed ourselves and keep ourselves happy and strong from our own soil. It met with a lot of resistance from people who say Bonham banned flour. We never banned flour. We didn't have the foreign exchange to pay for it. And as I said before, those of us who grew up in the war days when those things didn't come, from what I look around, because I'll be 91 next month,
Wow.
and except for my blindness, I think my faculties are in pretty good shape. And a lot of my friends are still physically fit and mentally alert. And sometimes we see people who grew up on these imported things which certain people have brought back in, not as strong, as resilient as we were. But to come to the point and to answer your question, my hope, my dream, that we can reinsert the philosophy of feeding, clothing, and housing ourselves. Present government is doing a pretty good job at housing, though there are a lot of difficulties there. But you know, you can live under a tent, but you must eat. And a lot has to do with, to use a vulgar term, brainwashing. Too many of our, not our, your generation, have been persuaded that they must have these imported things. I'll share with you an experience that I've shared with many a time. The children who grew up with me didn't have any imported stuff coming in this house. That was unthinkable. And so they grew up on mangoes, local fruits, sapodillas. And I took them to US, where a relative had died, for them to meet the relatives. And a cousin brought a tray of apples and all the imported fruits, saying to them, "We know you don't get these at home." The little girl, who is now a scientist overseas, bit the apple first because the relative was making a fuss over apples. I know what? She asked if they didn't have any sapodillas or any guavas. And that was a powerful lesson to me because they didn't have the option of knowing what is right or wrong, what is nice or what's not nice. But when they brought these imported fruits, they were able to, their own palate told them local fruits were better. And I've told that story umpteen times to answer your question indirectly. And the task ahead of us is to encourage our farmers to use the land that they have to produce more quality local things and not to be consumed by the foreign exchange we're really not getting from this oil and gold. Let me again address your question indirectly. I'm not an economist. I'm a dunce when it comes to economics. But I don't understand that all this gold, oil that we are harvesting, gold is sold on the foreign markets for pounds, US dollars, and other currency. I don't understand that with all of these resources being harvested, our exchange rate still remains at, well, the other was 210, 220. I don't understand it. For me, it's a mystery and suggests that something is wrong. In the 80s, we kept it at 1 to 10 at one time, at least on the official market. And this, to me, is indicative that something is wrong in the way our present group of politicians are managing the affairs of this country and losing an opportunity to make optimal use of the resources the Creator has given us.
Yeah. And to pick up on the point you made, you were talking earlier about the fact that you like the story that you referenced, whereby you were talking about the young girl choosing to not take the foreign goods but to utilize the local items or local fruits that she's grown accustomed to. So the question I'm posing to you now is, what do you think needs to change, or where do you think the change needs to happen to remove us from this transactional instant gratification to a more developmental or long-term development of Guyana, so that we could cure some of the things that you mentioned, the foreign currency, the foreign exchange rate, the dependency on exports, and the dependency on importation as opposed to massive exportation of our products and a demand. What do you think needs to change in the culture of Guyana to remove us from this transactional viewpoint to a more developmental ideology?
To give you a generic answer, we need to retool completely our educational system. And that education must go beyond the 3 hours reading, writing, and arithmetic. It has to get to the communities. And we discussed this at a lecture by the professor from Jamaica on Thursday night at the African Museum. We need to begin this conversation. That's what I said in my letter. In the churches, in the mosques, in the mandirs. We have to begin the conversation within the communities among the young people. Because through no fault of theirs, they're lost. They're lost in the cloud and glamour of the immediate gratification.
Mm-hmm.
It will not be an easy task. And I don't know that, well, I hope we can get enough people, young people, in the professions to dedicate each day an hour to talk to young people, to tell them about the glories of their ancestors, the sacrifices they made, and the leap they need to make optimal use of our resources. It is possible, and I hope that we have the strength, the will to begin the process. To answer your question, therefore, it has to be education in its truest form, not in school, not in churches, but within the communities. To get our young people, and we deal with some of them every day, to understand the importance of education, the importance of study, and learning all about their history, the history of all the races. Because as I said in my letter, which you can read, unless you appreciate the history of all of our people, we are unable to move to the step of glory and goodness on the great Guyana.
Agreed. In reference to that letter or your letters that you spoke about, one of the key things you would have mentioned in those letters is that there has been a loss of, or you emphasize rather the importance of the historical consciousness. So I would like to ask you now, how do you see the situation more specifically to the Afro-Guyanese and the lack of an understanding or an appreciation of their history, as you referred to earlier? How do you see that linked or connected to the current politics and development of Guyana?
To answer your question, let me compliment the Europeans, slave masters. They did an excellent job during slavery. It talks about the Africans who came here. They are the only group that were completely severed from their roots, completely severed. Indians came with the drums, the religious tools. We call them Portuguese, came from Madeira, the Chinese. And the task, therefore, has to begin with courage. And let no one say, as they've accused people like David Hines of being racist. When the Africans talk about what they should be doing, to promote themselves, the arch enemy says you're racist. And so a lot of people back down. That is unfortunate. I've used the example umpteen times, and you probably hear me on this subject. When slavery was ended, both the Dutch and the British slave owners ensured that the manumitted Africans were not reconnected to the continent, both in difficulty of travel and communication. And that we were forced, and I use the word forced deliberately, to adopt Eurocentric beliefs and culture. And we have several generations who were not proud of the fact that they were black. That itself disables a people from advancing. Look around Guyana. If you see a man called Ching or Sing Ping, you can be pretty sure he's Chinese or half Chinese. If a man is de Barros de Souza Nascimento, pretty sure he came from Madeira or Portuguese. Sing, Sugrim, Posad, and any combination, you identify that person as being East Indian. But then you come to Hamilton, Corbin, John, Jack, Eloise, completely unconnected to Africa. They're European names. So very labels identify us as being the subject of the old master. And those fellas did a good job. In that letter which I sent you, I quoted, I didn't want to make it a long letter. But a lot of us go to our churches, which is good. But I hope to speak to some of the pastors to tell them to preach an enabling theology, not what was handed down from the white master. That in that letter I said, even the Bible which is rewritten, and a lot of us boast about the King James Version, in the Songs of Solomon, wise man, venerated, he says, I am black, but comely. Black, but beautiful. What the Bible did there is apologize for being black. He said black and comely, black but, a significant word. And as we read that every day, that goes into this brain here, that somehow our place is not at the top. The issue, therefore, is a challenge to every Guyanese, whether it be Afro, Indo, or Chino, to speak to our history. Unless you did that, we couldn't achieve the utopia of being one people and being one nation with a single destiny. And I hope that people like yourself, your generation, will spare the pain, the time, and the trouble to speak on these matters without being shy, without being afraid. Because the truth can be very difficult in these days, you know. I think one Corbin politician talked about uncomfortable truth. Young people, those in the 20s out of university, must be able to get hold in little ways. As I said at a meeting some weeks ago, pick a street, pick a yard, pick a family, and talk to them about our history. Give themselves a sense of being proud to be who you are. Not easy, difficult. I'll give you one other example, which I was speaking to a family member a few months ago. And I thought it had come to an end. When I did my pharmacy, my father's drugstore, a popular item was black and white bleach cream and Palmer's Skin Success, sold to lighten the skin of black people. I was flabbergasted when I was told these items are still being sold. And I asked myself the question, why should a person who is dark brown or black want to lighten their skin? I've seen it in my own family. I've lived in a house where my sister was darker than I am. And I was mortified when family come into my house and turn to my mother and say, why is this girl so dark? Those statements perhaps propelled me into active politics to say to people, if you're black, you're not but unbeautiful. And to tell our young people, whether Indian or African, that the dark pigmentation is a prize to be proud of, not to be ashamed of. In my house, I think I've had some success. One of my daughters is very dark. And I listened from this porch to her boasting to the neighbors that I am darker than you. That's because of her upbringing. 2 generations ago, she was asking for bleach cream, wanted to lighten her skin. But I say that to say we can succeed. And I don't take credit for it. But I think that statement was because in this house, we thought that what was important was not the color of your skin, nor the texture of your hair, but the content of your character and the brains and the knowledge you have as a result of deep, serious study. The task is monumental. But before I leave this plane, I hope that I can see a card of young people like your good self on the campaign trail to change things around and move away from this nonsense we've heard for years. If you're black, stay back.
Mhm.
If you're brown, stick around. If you're white, you're all right. It is no longer a joke, it's a serious matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the Afro Guyanese must read of their history and not be ashamed of where they came from, because many of their ancestors jumped overboard when they realized they were being enslaved. And their bones, those who never reached the shore here, their bones are rattling at the bottom of the Atlantic, begging us to deal with that tragedy of slavery and move to higher level by study, because the technological age, we cannot compete
Correct.
unless we study. By study, having a sense of morality and knowing that we equal to those who are still exploiting us.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Now, you noted that the history has been dismissed, or it is being dismissed. And we see in today's society, or even recently, we see a new bridge
What?
a new bridge that has been built, right? Doing away with the Demerara Harbor Bridge. And then we see a constant effort by this particular administration towards politically branding these infrastructural developments of Guyana. My question would be, do you think that the political branding is more important than the functional legacy that it provides to Guyana? And we must assess this considering the fact that when the first Demerara Harbor Bridge was built and developed by Mr. Burnham, as you would have noted, he was not one who wanted the bridge to be named after him. You would have even noted further that the town of Linden, that is named after him, was not a decision that was made by Comrade Leader, but it was one that was subject to consultation. You also mentioned the development, or the genus from which the Tamari International Airport, as it was called that back then, where it came from. It was a consultative process. And the same thing we can see applying to the President's College of Excellency, which we know was a idea and a brainchild from Comrade Leader. And at all these stages, we see some form of consultation with the people with whom it was affected. Fast forward now to 2025, we have one of the first bridges of its kind in Guyana, and it has now, no, well, it is now being dubbed or named after a former president. And to our minds, as we're from where we sit, there is no information to show that there was a consultative process that included the people for whom it was developed for. So my question would be, how do you see this political branding tie in with the functional legacy? And we're considering now the context of what you mentioned earlier, but with our people not being familiar with their history, or they're not there's a lack of education being perpetuated towards that end. So what are your views of those particular tools being used to rewrite history, if I could say?
Well, it's unfortunate, sad, and the worst form of banality, vulgarity, of people who don't understand their role in government. I mean, there could have been some form of consultation, but to name that bridge an excellent engineering effort from what I've seen, after the sitting vice president, former president, is unfortunate. It said there's been no consultation. The Demerara Harbor Bridge served with all its shortcomings for years, put together by a local engineer who was my junior at Queen's College, Joe Holder. We never sought to brand it Burnham's Bridge. You talked about President's College. It was opened a month after Burnham passed. A lot of people thought we should name it President's College, the School of Burnham's College, the School of Excellence. We thought we didn't want to venerate any one man. You mentioned Lyndon. I am the person who was at the center of that committee being named Lyndon when Wismer, Christianborg, and Mackenzie were made one as a result of the Local Government Act. It took place after a meeting when we had all the community leaders around. And they suggested we need to find a name for this new community. And we got suggestions. And at a meeting held at the home of Carl de Gar, was a manager of a singer company. The leaders from Wisbrook, Christianburg were all there. And we came up with the idea of naming it after Burnham. He knew nothing about it. When I came down to Georgetown, I mentioned it to him. And he said, he was quite cool. He said, if that's what you all want, no problem. And we had it gazetted. And that's how the name Lyndon came. It wasn't out of any narcissism as we see today. The airport is an abomination. We named the airport to Mary to honor the indigenous people of this country, Amerindians. Tumeri was symbolic and represented rock carvings found in some of the communities where the Amerindians dealt. The word Tumeri came out of a combination of Amerindian words. And to name it after Dr. Jagan is an insult to the entire American community. I know a lot of people, when they're writing up the forms, just write to Mary and nothing else. And that is the journey we're on today. Because when these things are done, they are pretty confident that in another 10, 20 years, nobody will know the truth and the history. But they say this bridge is, whatever name it is, I won't even call the name. And that is where we are today. And we've got to fight against it, talk about it, educate our young people that when they cross the bridge, say we're going over the Demerara Bridge from the east bank to the west bank, and nothing else. It should not be described any other way. Because even if they had the facade, they could have had some consultation. We have a certain gentleman putting things out there like a rabbit, and with some amount of arrogance, reminiscent of the imperial days, naming structures that are intended to put aside other people in this country.
Well said, Mr. Green. Well said. It's always a pleasure listening to you and heading down to my last two final questions. Now, you are the last surviving person from the Independence Conference.
For what?
From the Independence Conference,
Yeah.
before, prior to we gain our independence, there was a team of individuals, and to date, you are the last person alive from that. So you are a national treasure of a sort, at
Thank you.
least to us, and we appreciate you for that. Now, based on that, you would be in a unique position to be able to comment on the infrastructural development of Guyana. I remember in a prior conversation we had, you told me that when you were my age, going to the moon was something that was relegated to fiction. And now it is a reality that we are living in. So, to be able to help us understand where we have come from so that we could appreciate where we need to go, my question to you would be, what would you say is the most underrated infrastructural development in Guyana to date? The most underrated infrastructural development to date?
Well, you use the term infrastructure, but the most important development that I see is where Burnham sought to give ordinary people an opportunity to get a professional education. What does that infrastructure, to answer your question, is the Linden Suzek Road at Independence, the road from Georgetown to Preca was a hazard. The road from Georgetown to Micah to Rosignol was a death trap during the rainy season, and the rice farmers who had the tractors made good money when vehicles slipped off the road and they used the tractors to pull it back. The seawall was endangered. People don't know that what is now the seawall outside Georgetown was not the original barrier. The seawall was a few miles out, but the sea kept eroding. And when we got independence, it was clear that if we didn't have the seawall properly constructed, as it is now, where we are today would not have been, because the sea was aggressive. So the major infrastructure works were the roads, East Coast, roads to Quarantine, and the other development, the MMA scheme, was fashioned on the Burnham, which brought together the Maikoni, Mahaikan, and Barry rivers to harmonize the flow, which you see when you travel along the East Bank. Now, so that we release all those lands for agricultural purposes. There were swamps, quagmire during the rainfall. And those are some of the major infrastructural developments. The buildings were routine things. I don't like to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And in closing, a lot of our comrades may be wavered or they may feel not as motivated considering or coming off of the heels of the 2025 regional and general election. I would like you to give them a charge in closing and an encouragement to our base and remind them of what is to come and what we still need to achieve. I would just like you to give us a charge in closing, something to inspire us from where you're sitting, somebody who has sat and watch the coming and the going of different administrations, somebody who was a part for the fight of independence. And many years after, the Guyana which we know and love today, I would like you to just give a brief encouragement to our supporters at this point in time.
Well, I say first that they need to understand that we're down but not out. And what happened in September is like a good boxer. He's down, he can come back and win. We've got to retake our place in the society as a credible opposition and then government. We've seen how government is spending these enormous sums. Why they're borrowing money, I don't know. I don't understand. The challenge we face today, particularly among our supporters, is that they have been given little things that they did not have before. I don't think there's any real unemployment in the country today. But what employment is available to the base of the People's National Congress? The lower level. And we need to recognize, we have to explain to our base that yes, they were getting $10 20 years ago. They may be getting 20 now. But the resources we have, should we give them 80 and 90? In other words, the potential is there. But we've got to bring it out by having a party in office that's prepared to face the Goliath and to extract maximum benefit for our people and to retake this country from the clutches of those who are greedy and those who are practicing the old technique of master, you know. You get a few people here, give them ministry there, give them a job here, and they hold that up as what they're doing for the other people. We don't need tokens. If you look at this government, there's one group who control the country. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like the Prime Minister. But he knows, and we know, he don't call the shots. The various ministers who have been brought in. You have the turncoat who is in Venezuela as our ambassador. What influence he has on anybody. And you need to work for a party that will ensure an equitable distribution of real authority, making decisions in the interest of making a small man a real man. That's what we said years ago. And you talk about independence. When we got independence, we knew it was a ding-dong struggle. In fact, not to digress, when we arrived in London for the Independence Conference, I think it was the day after, about the 10th of November, 1965. Ian Smith had just declared UDI, that's Unilateral Declaration of Independence, in Rhodesia, because he refused to accept a proposal that Black Africans would be able to vote and therefore outnumber the white Africans. And he declared UDI, in November of 1965. I remember very clearly. And when we arrived in London, Burnham talked to the colonial secretary and said, when are you going to send troops to put down that rebellion? He said, oh, Mr. Burnham, you're a naughty chap. Because in 1953, we did nothing wrong, but to send troops to put the Burnham Jagan government out of office because of the ideological struggle, which really erupted when Sir Winston Churchill made his famous speech, and he talked about a widening, an iron curtain descending over the Balkans. He made a speech at Fulton, Missouri in 1946 when the new president of the United States, Harry S. Truman, chaired the meeting. And since then, they've sought to put down any movement. They sought to give real power to the people. This government is no different from the imperial government. We've got to fight against it, but let people understand that it's a task of putting in your head what is happening and to know our history, to know our place in history. Because if you don't know your place in history, you'll be displaced, disfigured, and as Dr. Jagan said, be at the bottom of the ladder. I repeat what I said earlier. I'm prepared to work with you young fellows in that noble task to develop a consciousness among our young people who have been disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
One of the things I would like you young people to discuss, if you're serious about politics, is these cell phones. I've seen in this and other communities, young people absorb these cell phones literally day and night, ignoring the studies. This is a mumbo jumbo nonsense on these cell phones. Created to disfigure the minds of our young people in the third world. But you young fellows have a massive task, and your mind is prepared to help in any way possible so that the next generation inherit a land that is free, a land that is great, and a land that has plenty for all of us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Green. It was really an insightful and enlightening conversation. And we do hope to have you on the program once more before the year ends. I would like to wish you a happy birthday in advance. I will take time to wish you a happy birthday on the day, but I would like to take time in front of all to wish you a happy birthday in advance. That will be the big 9-2. And we pray that you will continue to add one and one and one until the time comes when you have no more to add.
I want to thank my wife for keeping me fit. She's not practicing her medical skills externally, but she's doing a good job in keeping your man fit and fiddle. And the major birthday this year is not mine, it's her birthday.
Okay.
On the 24th of November.
Well, wow, we have a whole month of celebration then.
And the
Awesome.
10th is our wedding anniversary.
Wow, wow, wow. So we definitely need to come back in November and pay you guys a visit. We definitely will.
Well, speak to El Jefe.
Ah, we will. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hamilton. Ladies
My
and
pleasure.
gentlemen, this has been a special Nation Watch just for your thought and your consideration. I sure and I hope that you will share the knowledge widely that we have received from Mr. Green and that we will continue focusing on educating ourselves, reconnecting back to our roots, and being able to chart a proper way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eden Corbin, and you have been on Nation Watch. Thank you.